let's get started. I figure we'll work with the SEC to start. They're kind of the big elephant in the room and have been for many years since power left the West Coast. But so let's start there. Who are your favorites? I mean, it's the SEC is kind of Georgia and Alabama, right? We all know that. But maybe start with those two and where you see holes or where you see that they might run it, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I mean, Trav, you start with Georgia, you start with Alabama. You're talking about the two teams that probably have the most NFL prospects on their rosters in the entirety of college football. I'm a Georgia fan personally, so they're very close to my heart. Obviously, bringing back the returning quarterback from the national champions, lose a ton on defense, lose 7 draft picks, NFL. It's going to be tough. Return 7 people on offense. The tight end room has 4 guys that are going to play on Sunday, so the tight end room is exceptional. So Georgia's going to be tough. The East is definitely the easier of the two divisions, in my opinion.
Yep.
Georgia doesn't have much competition. Florida's down. Kentucky lost, half their offense, half their defense.
Right.
If you're talking about a team that might surprise, I'm kind of intrigued by South Carolina.
Interesting.
Yeah, Beamer in year 2. They get a Spencer Rattay back at quarterback from the transfer portal. A lot of people had him as number 1 pick of last year's NFL draft before the fall started, and obviously that didn't go as according to plan in Oklahoma. But the kid definitely can throw the football downfield. Decision-making is questionable. But if you're looking for a team that kind of surprise in the East, maybe sneak up on Georgia, gun to my head, I'd go South Carolina. I mean, how do you see the East breaking down?
I like that because I haven't heard anybody say that to me. And that's part of what this podcast is really all about on all subjects, is talking about things that maybe you're not going to hear elsewhere. I've heard a lot of chatter about Florida. Paying attention. I'm a Pac-12 guy. Obviously, you're a Georgia guy. I'm an SC guy. But the big dog in our conference right now is Utah. And obviously, they open at Florida, which was one of the big games I was going to mention here. But a lot of people are thinking Florida is going to be a pretty good fight for Utah. And what I've seen from Utah is they're a pretty complete football team. And outside of traveling across the country, some heat, Utah doesn't typically start well early in the season. I think even last year they were like 1-3, 1-4 right out of the blocks, or 1-2, and came out and, still got to the Rose Bowl. So, Florida's somebody I'm interested in just because I've heard the hype, but I'm also not buying the hype. I'm kind of going until I see the product on the field. They didn't do anything last year that says, wow, Florida's going to win everything in the East this year.
Absolutely. New coach, Billy Napier's coming over from the American Athletic Conference in the Sun Belt. It's always intriguing. The thing I found interesting about Florida is that Coach Napier's already had to send out 2 memos, State of the Union addresses to the fan base, urging patience and practice, and it's going to take some time. For a coach having to send out that type of letter twice when he has 1 spring ball in,
wow,
not a great sign for Florida Gators.
That's news to me. I didn't know about this.
It's very shocking. I mean, I've been around football a long time. My brother played at Stanford. I worked in the NFL for a second.
Yep.
To have a coach feel so much pressure from the fan base and the alumni base that he's got to issue letters to squash message board rumors. Things are not going well. New quarterback for the Gators. So that's always interesting to see what happens. I think Utah's going to give them everything they want and more this first week. Yes, the humidity is going to be that, but Utah is a very, very physical football team.
Yes, they are.
And I'm not sure the Gators match up well with them in the trenches. Last time I saw the line, it was started at 2 under, Utah -2.
You moved to 3, right?
To Utah -3.
Yep.
So it seems that the smart early money is leaning the Utes' way. I kind of like Utah in that matchup.
I do too. I feel the same way, but I wouldn't be surprised if Florida shows up and might pull out a squeaker. It's one of those
swamp
things.
In the evening. It's happened.
That's
before,
right.
absolutely.
It's the swamp, man. It's that's what I love about college football as opposed to the NFL is the pageantry and the tradition actually does matter. Playing in the swamp at night is a tough task for 18 to 21-year-olds, right? So that's definitely gonna be intriguing. The other team that I keep hearing a lot about, and specifically because of Jimbo Fisher poking at Nick Saban, right? And because they've had a hell of a recruiting class and did well in the transfer portal, it's A&M. And I'm not sure, again, that I buy Florida or A&M in the SEC. They could very well be great football teams, but you still got to pass Georgia and Alabama. And I don't know from what I've seen or heard that either of those teams are ready to do so.
No, I mean, Jimbo's getting the athletes in. He did it at Florida State, #1 recruiting class in the country. There's a lot of good things going on at Texas A&M.
Yep.
Texas A&M loses a ton on both sides of the ball.
Right.
They turn 4 starters on offense.
Yep.
Yes, they get their starting quarterback from the start of the season back, who missed most last year, early season injury. 5 on defense. I think Texas A&M's overrated this year.
Yep.
Right now, according to Vegas, they're the 3rd highest favorite team to win the SEC. I mean, still 18-1. It's not an overwhelming favorite.
Sure.
But I think Texas A&M and College Station takes a step back from where they were last year. The reality is Alabama's league. Alabama returns the best defense player in the country, best offensive player in the country, 18 starters. It's going to be tough for anybody to beat Alabama. But I'm kind of with you. Texas A&M, I think, still a couple years away from getting on the same level where they can be competitive with Georgia, Alabama year in, year out.
Right. I totally agree. And with their recruiting classes, that does speak well for the next couple of years. But it does take time. Kids don't show up on campus and immediately become, a 5-star in high school, doesn't become an All-American. They do, but it's not a guarantee, right? It takes time to get used to college, get used to playing at that level, that speed, learning new plays. I could see them in a year or two being a very strong football team with what they've done so far.
What's your opinion on this NIL stuff? Obviously, Texas A&M first into it really made a big splash.
Yep.
I mean, do you think that money's going to continue for the coming years and keep getting class after class? Or is this like a one-time rocket ship for Texas A&M where they just got on it before everybody else?
Great question, because NIL is new, and that's something that we're going to talk about on this show a little bit later too. Obviously, being a Trojan, we've used NIL and the portal massively, which I'm happy with because it's within the confines of college football right now. But I don't know. To me, I think there'll be a lot of show me for the Aggies, right? Like if they win and this is proving to be, then I think the alumni continues to do what our alumni will do at USC. But I do think this is it's kind of a bespoke moment in college football, because we're now looking at the kind of the independent nature of these athletes, which we've never been able to do before. And I still think there's going to be rules to come out. And again, we can talk about this deeper, but I do think if done properly and proactively, like some of these schools, like USC and A&M, for example, there's a lot of good that can come from that with changing the face of your roster. For example, with us changing the culture, 4-8 is a pretty dismal year for the Trojans, and first in a long time. So to have that turnaround, I don't think it would have been possible in, the previous decades with how college football was run. So I think we'll see. And one thing that I want to get out in the NIL conversation, which we won't do right now, we'll do it a little bit later when we're done with the conferences, but I do want to hear your understanding of the collectives and the collectives that are supported by the university, and then the independent collectives that are kind of run by alumni, because that's something I've started to study with what we're doing. And I'm curious to get your take on that, but let's keep with the conference side. So SEC, obviously we both got Alabama and Georgia. That's probably the likely two they're going to show up. I think Georgia, while they're still going to be strong as heck, they always are for the last 10 years or 8 years. But I do think, I think there might be a drop off with them, because they've lost they lost 8 starters on their D, right? And you said 7 to the draft. I think Stetson Bennett is fantastic when he stepped in for JT Daniels last year. But it's hard to follow up a, first season, show up, play well, and then build upon that, right? He's a good player. He'll still be a good player, but can you put up the numbers that's going to push your team to get to the Natty again? I think it's yet to be determined. So, from there, the one I wanted to talk about was, what are some of the other big games in this conference that you think will help shape this conference? We already mentioned Utah, Florida, but that's not an SEC game. That's just an SEC team. One game that I have circled is on October 8th, when you've got A&M at Bama. Like we just discussed, Bama's probably the strong horse in the conference, probably can't be beat by a lot of these teams unless they don't show up. But it's still going to be a test, right? Like A&M's on the road, so that obviously helps Bama. Another game I was looking at, and again, not straight SEC game, but Oregon at Georgia. I think Georgia's going to probably roll. But if Oregon comes to town and puts up a good game, or by God wins, that throws a little wrench. Not going to hurt their SEC aspirations, but it would certainly on the national college football side of things go, Oregon, Pac-12 team, SEC. So those are kind of the 3 games. Is there any other games outside of those 3 that I mentioned that you're looking at?
It's kind of a unique, quirky year for the draw, because obviously with the 2 divisions, you get unbalanced schedules. And both Georgia and Alabama don't draw very, very good teams from the other side.
Right.
So that kind of takes away some of the marquee matchups.
Yep.
The last several years, we've gotten so used to, Alabama, LSU being a massive game.
Yep.
New coach, Brian Kelly at LSU, hasn't announced his quarterback yet. Probably going to take a couple of years to get that going. LSU's not where they've been. Ole Miss, Lane Train. You're familiar with Old Kiffin?
He's been on a run with some recruiting efforts, right? And
he's done good in the portal. Yeah. But even then, they were, a Peach Bowl team, looked great in the Peach Bowl, but they lose an NFL draft pick at the quarterback position. Can Lane replace him? Jackson Dart Is he going to be able to stay healthy and be a player in the SEC? I mean, he looked great for the flash at USC, but that was what, a half?
Yep. I mean, it was less than 2 games for sure. Now, knowing Jackson Dart, because I'm a Trojan, I think him being with Lane in a system that can promote what, some of his positive characteristics as a quarterback, I think they could seem like a decent team. But again, being in the SEC, that schedule of just conference schedule, you have to play some really big guys, get through those games, and then be unscathed to go and compete the next week, right? Being injured, banged up. We all know football's a violent game. And when you're playing with the big hog mollies that are going to the NFL, there's going to be nicks and bruises. That's just football. So that'll be interesting one to watch, because the SEC for however many years has been Alabama, Georgia. And it seems like there's some teams that are kind of in that second tier that are ready to challenge. I think this year is going to tell us how far they've come along in that process, right?
Absolutely. You're looking for a team to kind of sneak up and surprise people in the SEC this year. I keep coming back to one team time and time again, and it's Coach Leach in Stark Vegas.
I like it.
Lots of points. They can play the ball, throw it all around.
Yep.
Not quite as physically demanding on the offensive line, which is good. I mean, Mississippi State's not going to come out and run 45 times downhill. They can trick you. They return 9 starters on offense, 8 on defense, a very manageable non-conference schedule. They're plus 12,000 to win the league right now. I'm not saying Mississippi State's going to win the league, but if you're looking for a team that can kind of surprise in the West a little bit and win, 8, 9, maybe even 10 games, I would say Stark Vegas, the Bulldogs, are
I like that
really
call.
going to have a strong year.
Yeah, I like that call. To your point, returning 17 returning starters. That matters in college, right? So that's very interesting. And, it'll be interesting to see what Leach does, because he's always been an interesting character, and he can call the X's and O's, but can he do it with the big boys and maybe with a little less talent that he's competing against? We'll see. So I think that covered our favorites, the big games, any sleepers, players to watch. This kind of coincides with the Heisman conversation. Obviously, we've got Bryce Young. You've got Will Anderson, maybe the first defensive guy we've seen in New York for a long time, right? For Alabama, playing linebacker position. And then there's a host of other guys, but I don't know. Are there anybody that we should be keeping an eye on individually outside of the guys we see in the Heisman chatter?
Young and Anderson are obviously your first 2 choices. And the thing to remember about any vote that the media votes on, any award, is that narratives play a big role in that.
Yep.
And the media might have a little Alabama fatigue. I mean, you can only give it to the Alabama's quarterback so many times.
Right.
Georgia, nobody on offense is going to be standout. I mean, they're going to split carries between 4 guys.
Right.
Stetson Bennett, Dixie Doug Flutie isn't going to win a Heisman.
Right.
I mean, that's just the nature of the position.
He could win you games, but he's not going to put up Heisman-like numbers, right?
Absolutely. I mean, he's going to manage the game. The defense is going to keep him in it, and hopefully they can just out-talent you and win by 2 to 3 touchdowns.
Right.
If you're looking outside the board, outside the box for a sleeper Heisman pick, the 2 guys I would go back to would be Rattay, who we mentioned earlier. He was the front runner for the award last year and completely forgotten about now in Columbia.
Yep.
And the other guy is a hooker from Tennessee.
Okay.
Very good in Heupel's offense. He's going to put up a ton of numbers. If Tennessee can go 7-5, 8-4, and kind of be that number 2 team in the SEC, he might get some media attention. But really, it starts and ends Bryce Young, Will Anderson.
Yeah. So those kind of what everybody knows. But thank you for adding to it. So let's